The music industry was unfortunate because it had the wrong file size. The file sizes were small enough that it was the first to get disintermediated, or fucked if you want a technical term, by the internet. And so the immediate perception, the immediate reaction in the industry was, they're stealing our stuff.
The phrase was, we only realised that we had an audience when they started stealing from us. And that's, again, you could phrase that and it looks like music business talking about all of its consumers as stealing and its fans as stealing. It's not about them stealing, it's about the fact that how disconnected we were. The brief to me was, how do we make the audience central to everything that we do at Sony Music? And how do we join in a conversation with our consumers around our artists? A guy called Matt Hart at Industry Approved, he'd done a lot of work with Radio 1, and he'd come in with this process called the consumer cone. If you understand that there are different people engaged with your product at a different level across the landscape, that one thing that you understand that. From that point onwards, it kind of clicked into place of what we needed to do.
In my opinion, the UK has got the most, the richest and the most vibrant music scene in the world. The remit was to help the business become as passionate about audiences and about the fan as we are about our artists.
When someone says, we need to segment, I'm like, do we? Sounds brilliant, go ahead and do it.
We start off with the cone, and then with the 4 macro groups, so fanatics, enthusiasts, casuals, and differents, then broken down within those 4 groups, depending on age and gender and where you are within those 4 groups, into one of 28 segments, which is a lot considering most businesses will have about 6 to 10.
To have that number of segments was actually quite reassuring. It actually made you think, actually, this is quite real. This actually feels quite real now. So the next stage was naming them, really, and that was exciting. I say exciting, that was a challenge.
We wanted to make sure that if you were articulating who the target segment was, then if you were saying that to someone who had no prior knowledge of the segmentation, would be able to understand from the name and recognise who that audience is.
We involved all of the business, all of the stakeholders, the marketeers and all of this got involved in naming the segments. Couldn't be the insight team naming the segments, the business had to name the segments. So they were involved in naming the segments, they understood the segments.
Such as white collar radicals and wags is one of our segments, and then we've got grumpy blokes, Easy Like Sunday Morning, and X Factor Mums.
So we've got all of that part of the process. We've kind of segmented our audiences, we've understood our audiences, and we now needed that glue that was going to connect our audiences to our artists. And that's the DNA process. The DNA document is literally just a brand key. We started, right in the early days, of calling it the brand key. We're going to do the brand key and this is what you need to do. And quite literally the business shut down. We're like, we're not having any of that. You are not, fuck off. If you're giving me a brand key, that's, suddenly you're into soap powder world. We're not calling it a brand key. So all we did is change the name of it to Artist DNA, and suddenly everybody went, getting that. This is a handy document, this, isn't it? And it was literally just a title change. Unless it sounds patronising, it's not. It's because people are very cynical and people have got a day job to do.
Only Richard could have brought this thing into being because he came from a label and had the chairman's blessing to work on this thing.
And we'd done that and that got the work bedded in, and now you needed somebody who was going to win those hearts and minds.
Richard and I worked very closely about how do you do that. So he started that conversation. So I went to all the label MDs and I said, okay, I've got no experience in the music industry. So what does a guy have to do to be taken seriously here? They said, well, you need to have a hit. And I said, well, that's a bit difficult because no one's letting me sign any records. What else can I do? And they said, do something creative.
We knew that we needed to create some compelling assets and some compelling tools and materials which would bring the segments to life.
So the strategy that we took very early on was to say, well, why don't we treat it like content? So rather than telling people about segmentation and tools, why don't we make things that people want to look at? We started out by turning the segments into a book, which we called the Segment Bible.
Quite an in-depth document which detailed each of the segments individually.
Basically what we tried to do is make it friendly and make it in the language of the way people actually talk, rather than sort of management consultancy or corporate.
The Bible really was I think it was a real turning point and a really important landmark for the adoption of segmentation within Sony Music UK.
We made enough copies for everyone in the building, but we only gave 10 out. And then suddenly everyone's like, oh, can I have a copy of that?
So that was fantastic, but we wanted to develop a web-based portal which would house content and insight content around our segmentation.
It felt to me that talking to people about segmentation wasn't really going to work, so we started talking to them about audiences.
We built a website that we called Meet Your Audience, so it was quite it's quite a call to action for label staff. We had one member of the team go around the whole of the UK on a road trip, meeting and filming all the different types of music consumer.
Creating short films, interviews, playlists, taking photographs, and basically building a body of knowledge around our 28 segments that lived in a website, and which was then augmented by tools like a mapping tool where you could type in an artist and these segments would pop up and you could explore them. You could look at which segments had a propensity towards a certain brand and then see which are. So we kind of created an interactive thing that people could play with.
We also made that available to potential brand partners as well, to say, look, this is what we understand about the UK music market. These are the types of consumers, not just of music, but they're the same people that brands are trying to have conversations with. So we found it was actually a very good business development tool as well.
And then the final piece of the puzzle was to actually then have a community, which we called Sony Music Backstage, where we had sort of 1,500 of our 28 types of audience, so a representative cross-section of everyone in a kind of closed Facebook group where they're having conversations with us 24/7.
And we didn't really know what to expect, because when we flicked the switch, and what we saw was something quite remarkable in that it was hyper engaged, and that people were, the community members were actually starting their own brainstorms and almost mimicking what we were trying to do.
There was a lot of science masquerading as art with a sprinkling of science and every permutation and combination in between. But really it was a managerial and a cultural challenge rather than a how do we do segmentation.
Fundamentally, this is a story about culture change and about how insight and intuition can coexist, and about how insight can help support intuition.
I've seen the chairman, junior product manager, argue about the cover of an artist's album. And I've sat in the meeting room when that product manager went, if you're asking me to change the album cover as the chairman of Sony Music, of course I will change the art. I'm going to sit here, of course, you're bugger me, I'm not going to argue with you. I will change the cover of this artist. If you're asking me to change this album cover as a 50-year-old white man, I don't give a shit. Your opinion means nothing. And that's when it resonated for the chairman and everybody in that room. And from that point, that story resonates out around the business. And product managers start to realise, hold on a second. All I'm being given are tools to back up my gut instinct, that I can sit and go, I don't really care what you think. I'm not trying to sell the album to you, am I? And I can back it up. And that really is powerful. That when you show product managers that this isn't there to replace your gut instinct, this is to support your gut instinct. It
was kind of a real challenge, this balance between intuition and insight, because people always felt, particularly in A&R, which is almost like a shaman. It's like, I'm the rainmaker. I know that thing's going to work. And that is the way it works. And the more, at the beginning I thought, can this be? No, it can't be. There must be a better way of doing it. And there isn't. There isn't. So it is really about getting people excited and as passionate about audiences as they are about artists.
I think the segmentation helps visualize something which was, it's always been there of, how do you break an act to platinum and beyond? But I think that, just little things such as, the visualization of the market as a map, and almost saying, I want to go there to there to there.
You're then suddenly in the realms of phased marketing campaigns. Fuck me. You've gone from not knowing anything into a diagram that gets you involved in phased marketing campaigns by the end of the sentence.
And also think that segmentation is, an insight itself. So, the function of if we've got an act, what's the widest possible audience that we can take this act to?
When the chairman or A&R guys were going to speak to an artist, they would bring me in and say, look, we've got this weird thing over here that we don't quite understand, but it's quite cool, was essentially how it was presented. You should hear about it. And I would talk to the artist and their management about audiences, and invariably they would try and put themselves in a segment, or they'd be, oh, I'm one of those, or that's my audience, or this. And we would show them some of the creative work that we were doing off the back of it, and in a number of cases it was the difference between them signing with us and a competitor.
Suddenly they've got this team that understand their audiences as well, that have met their audiences, have been into their audience's home. Suddenly you're talking in the same kind of language.
And at that point, then the label MDs were saying, look, these guys are actually plugged into the artist community. They're cool. So we had a hit. And that's when we kind of tipped into the next level of, okay, this is something that we do.
What lives at the heart of this story, it's been about culture change and about inspiring people. If there was anything to learn from our experience, it would be make it fun, make it exciting, make it creative.
We are feeding some of the minds in our business with such good information and such good tools that our whole capability in marketing is getting up. Our whole benchmark of who we employ and don't employ, who we bring into the team and who we don't bring into the team, has up to level.
The subtext of what we're doing is not just becoming an audience-led or an artist and audience-led record company. It's actually becoming a completely different company. The next phase of our journey, maybe we'll be here in 3 years having another one of these chats, is not going to be how we get the segmentation adopted. It's actually how we transform our business model by constantly understanding how the audience is moving. So you can only do that if it's an integral part of the way you are, as opposed to something that you need to learn. So don't be afraid, listen, and make good shit. That's what I would say.